When it comes to composing musical scores, title pages are usually an afterthought, but in reality, these pages could potentially make a positive or negative impact on a reader's first impression of your score. So today, I'll be going over how to format these prefatory materials so that your scores come out looking professional and ready to be shared. If you're new here, my name is Sat Haddad. I'm a composer that's written for orchestras and chamber ensembles all over the world, and I'm here over on this channel to share my experiences with all of you. Now, before we get going, I do want to let you know that I do have a list of services that I provide down in the description below, if any of you are interested in pursuing any of those. Okay, so we're going to divide this video into two sections: scores for large ensembles like orchestras and wind ensembles, and scores for small ensembles like string quartets and solo flute. I'll be using various scores from the modern repertoire, as these examples most closely exemplify the most up-to-date presentation methods. The score examples that I'm pulling from come from a very wide gamut of sources, including major publishers like Ricordi, Schott, and Boosey and Hawkes, as well as self-published composers who I find present actually equally compelling prefatory pages. Let's get started with orchestral scores from major publishers. We'll start with Ricordi, a publishing house that's based in Italy with offices in London, Berlin, and New York. So here is what Ricordi's issue page looks like. I really like how Ricordi sets this up because they make all their scores really accessible to the public. So you can see right here that they have over 1,000 scores that you can peruse for free right on this website. So it's really good for us composers that are just trying to study scores, or even musicians that are trying to figure out what pieces they want to play on their next season. Of course, we're here to see an orchestral score. So let's go ahead and take a look at the one I prepared for you today, which is going to be Georg Friedrich Haas's Ungefähr ganz genau. I'm really sorry if I screwed up that German pronunciation, but it roughly translates to about exactly. So of course we'll have the composer's name first, then right below that we'll have the title, and then right below that we have the orchestral forces in very small print. So right here it says for large orchestra, and then below that we have the date of composition, in this case 2022. In the middle you see partitur. That just means score. So in English, if you want to write this, you can write full score somewhere in that section. You'll notice with other publishers that they put all these different things in slightly different places, but you'll notice that all of them have some combination of these things on the very first page. On the very bottom, of course, if you have a publisher, you put the publisher's name there. So right at the bottom, it says Ricordi in large font. Now, this next page is not completely necessary. It depends if you have these things for your piece, but in this particular case, Haas does. He has a commissioner. So usually on a single page like this, without anything else on it, he would put something like commissioned by so-and-so orchestra for performance on so-and-so date and so-and-so place. So right here, Haas actually does this, and you'll see the date, you'll see that it was in Vienna, etc. On the very bottom, you'll see, again, this is because this was published by a major publisher, of course. We're going to see something like this where it says version number blah, 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 blah. So over here, it says version number 75/2022, and there's these kind of markers right here on the bottom left that show the publishing information as well as the copyright, the publishing house, where it was published, all rights reserved, and that's, of course, also translated in the German and the Italian, since Ricordi is an Italian publishing company. On the very next page is going to be your most important page, and that's going to be your instrumentation page. So right here you can see it's mostly in German. You see that the very top is translated to instrumentation. Here he writes 2 piccolos, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets in B flat, 2 bass clarinets in B flat, 2 bassoons, contrabassoon, 4 French horns, 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, tuba, and then he has a big assortment of percussion over here, 3 percussion players, 2 harps, accordion, 12 first violins, 10 second violins, 8 violas, 8 celli, and 6 contrabass. In the strings parts, you don't necessarily need to indicate how many people are playing each part, but in the case of Haas's music, it's really important for him because each violinist typically has their own part. So if you only have, let's say, 8 first violins in your orchestra, you're not going to be able to play this piece. On the very bottom here, there are 2 very important pieces of information. One of these is going to be what is the transposition of the score. Now here, this is going to be a big symphonic orchestral score, right? Usually in these cases, we don't want to see a transpose score. That's usually reserved for wind ensemble scores. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. So this score, for example, is going to be our score in C. So all the instruments in the score are at sounding pitch, not at written pitch. It's very important. Right below that, we see the duration. So the duration of this particular piece is circa 29 minutes. So about 29 minutes. Now, the very next page before we get to the music is going to be our performance notes. So not every piece is going to have these, right? It depends on if there are any extended extended techniques or not. But in Haas's music, for example, there are a lot of indications of microtones. So here he actually writes what all the different accidentals are. So in this case, we have 1/6 of a tone down, 1/6 of a tone up, 1/6 of a tone lower from a flat, from a sharp, from another sharp, etc. And he even has 1/8 tones, which are even smaller than that. So he wants to give all those different indications. And then he gives the normal standard quarter tone indications, which he puts right here on the bottom. Then he even indicates multi-vibrato. I find that kind of interesting because most of the time that's what multi-vibrato looks like anyway, but he wants to make it crystal clear that this is what the indication for multi-vibrato is. Then he has this interesting square looking note head, which he calls soundless. So these are all the different extended techniques that maybe a player wouldn't normally know how to execute. He makes sure that he's putting them in these performance notes. Now, if there are any other instructions that the administration of the orchestra needs to know, this is where they would go. So for example, here, Haas has an instruction for the sound engineer to make sure that he knows how to handle the different intricacies of his piece. Now, one thing you will notice from this page that's missing is a program note. So not all composers are into writing program notes. It's not necessary that you have to have a program note, but oftentimes if there is a program note, it will probably be somewhere on this page. Now notice that when we get to the end of these title pages, the music starts on the right-hand side of the score. This is really important because when a conductor opens up a score like this, he or she wants to make sure that on the right-hand side, they're always used to seeing an odd number page. So for example, page 1 is always going to be on that right-hand side. They can always flip it over and they know, okay, that's the first page of music. If they think about going to page 17, for example, they know, okay, every score that I have in front of me, page 17 is going to be on that right-hand side. So it's important that you also follow this same standard. All right, so moving on to another major publisher, this is Boosey & Hawkes. Boosey & Hawkes is a little bit different in the way they peruse their scores. What you need to do is actually log in. This is free to do, by the way. But once you're logged in, you have an account, you can access a bunch of scores through their perusal library. So I just looked up John Adams right here, this American composer. Now, we're going to go ahead and click View Score. So again, it's going to look very similar to what we saw before with Ricordi. We see the composer's name at the top, and the title, then for orchestra in this case, then the publishing information on the very bottom. Now, when we turn the page, you'll notice that they put this page blank. So again, it's not standard how they do this, but you'll notice that every score that has this information has it in a certain way. So on the very next page, you'll see that the commissioning information is all on one page, like we saw with the Ricordi score. So here they have all the commissioning information, LA Phil, Ensemble Moderne, etc., etc. Where was the first performance? Even here, they even say the first recording. So all those things are on one single page. Now to the next page here, we're going to notice, again, we're going to have the most important information. At the very top, we have the instrumentation. So of course, this needs to be in score order. So here we have 4 flutes, 3 oboes, 3 clarinets, 3 bassoons, etc. I missed the bass clarinet somewhere in there. You're going to notice that it's also very, very important that you include doubling. So in this particular case, if I zoom in a little bit right here, we're going to notice that the flutes have 4 separate players, but the 3rd and 4th players double piccolo. So it's really important that you put that into parentheses. Let's look at another example. We have 3 separate oboe players. The 3rd oboe is going to double on English horn. Same thing with the clarinets. We have 3 separate clarinet players in B flat. The 2nd is doubling bass clarinet 2 in B flat. So that's very specific. So the 2nd player is doubling on the bass clarinet 2nd part in B flat. And then you'll notice that there is a 4th player that plays clarinet, but this player only plays bass clarinet in B flat. You'll notice that it says that right here. Now you'll notice that the flat sign is missing here. Often in German scores, they don't write the term flat. If they just put B, that actually means B flat. Now for whatever reason, I think there is some kind of weird mix of languages going on here. Typically speaking, you want to keep everything consistently English if it's all in English, like it seems that this score is. So there is a little bit of a strange discrepancy going on. So we're going to see another weird discrepancy going on with this score actually as well. So stay tuned for that. Going down, we see the 4 horns, 4 trumpets, 3 trombones, 2 tubas. Of course, there's no doublings here. Then we go down to our timpani, our 5 percussion players. We have a little asterisk here indicating that there's something extra down below that we need to take a look at. Then we have our piano, celesta, keyboard, sampler, guitar, and 2 harps. So all those like extra instruments, they would go right below the percussion players. players. Below that, you'll see the term strings. You'll notice that with Haas's score, it was very interesting because with him, he wanted to indicate exactly how many violin ones were playing, how many violin twos were playing, how many violas were playing, how many cellos were playing, how many basses were playing. With the Adam score, this is not necessary because you could potentially play the entire piece with 40 string players. You could play it maybe with 50 string players. You can maybe play it with 30 string players. So it's not totally crucial to him how many people are going to be playing on each of those parts. So in that case, all you have to do is write the word strings, and the orchestra knows exactly what that means. Right below that, we see our asterisk, which indicates all the different percussion instruments that are getting played. So percussion 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll notice that if there are instruments that are repeating, that Adams will put that here. So let's see if there's any repeating instruments. Here, I see one right now. So in the first percussion, we have xylophone, but also the third percussion has xylophone as well. So I might do an extra video at some point talking about how percussionists divide their instruments. I might need to enlist the help of a percussionist, professional percussionist. If there's anybody out there that wants to volunteer to be a part of that video, that would be interesting to do a dedicated video on just percussion. Comment down below if that's something you'd like to see. Okay, going down below here, we have our performance notes. So just like the Haas, we have a performance note that indicates all the different things that the administration of the orchestra needs to know about performing this piece. We also have the information regarding what the instrumentalists need to know about performing this piece. So we have indications about the guitar players. We have indications about the contact patches loaded. So here, this also has electronics as well. We have indications about the speaker situation. So there's lots of that kind of information here in the performance note. Note, however, that there is no program note. So again, program note is not 100% necessary, but we will see other examples in this video that do have program notes, so we'll take a brief look at those later on as well. On the bottom here, we can expect to see our duration. In this case, it's circa 48 minutes. So it's a really long piece, okay, guys? Now, one strange thing that I noticed is that throughout this entire page, there's no indication of whether the score is transposed or not, which I found extremely odd. So one way for us to kind of figure that out for sure is to actually look at what the music is doing specifically. So let's take a look here what's happening. So on the very first page, is there a way for us to figure out if the score is transposed or not? The way that I would typically do this actually is to take a look at the clarinet line, which is going to be a transposed instrument normally, and I'm looking to see if there's any way of telling if the harmonies are alike between the flute parts and the oboe parts and the clarinet parts. Here obviously on the first page there's no music, so there's no way to figure that out, but as I go a couple pages down, you'll notice that the clarinet part starts to look like it's doing something very similar to what the flutes and oboes are doing. So take a look at this. The flutes and oboes, which of course are in C, they're written in C, they sound in C. They're playing this line in unison. So we have C sharp, D sharp, E natural, G natural. That looks like that should be in unison. So I would expect the clarinets to be in unison with those two lines as well. But look what the clarinets are doing. E flat, F, F sharp, then we have A natural, B natural. So this looks very odd. I would have expected these lines to be all in unison. So with this in mind, I think in fact that what we're looking at here is a transposed score, because take a look at this. E flat is the written E flat of the clarinet, which means that the sounding pitch is going to be 1 major second lower than where it's written. So if we're playing an E flat on the clarinet, that means we're actually going to hear a D flat. Now D flat in this 12 equal tone temperament is going to be the same thing as C sharp. So of course D flat and C sharp, this is going to be unison. Look at the next pitch, F. We would expect that the sounding pitch, if this was transposed, to be E flat. Now take a look at the oboe line and the flute line, D sharp. So this would be the same pitch. Again, F sharp in the clarinet line, that means that we're going to expect to hear an E natural. Look at the oboe and flute line, that's going to be E natural. So I would have, again, I'm not here to tell Boozy and Hawks what to do at all. That's not my place, but it is strange that I had to like go through the score to figure that out to make sure 100% that the score is in fact transposed, rather than, for example, having an indication on that first prefatory page, that page that had the instrumentation and the performance note. It would have been nice to see that this score is transposed, score is transposed, transposed score. Any of those things would have been a good indication that, okay, I'm expecting to see a score that is completely transposed. I'm not expecting it to see a score in C like I'm used to seeing. All right, so now I want to move on to a self-published composer. This is going to be my friend Patrick O'Malley, who's written this amazing piece called Concerto for Viola and Orchestra, subtitled The Horizon. So again, here we have a slightly different formatting, right? It's not going to be exactly like the other two publishers we looked at, but it's all going to be very, very similar. It's just slightly different where he puts different things. So at the very top, we see the title Concerto for Viola and Orchestra. Here we have a subtitle, and right below that, we see the word score. We have the order in slightly different places, okay? But we have all the information, and we have, of course, his name on the bottom right, Patrick O'Malley. So as long as all that information is there on the very first page, it's very, very good to go, I would say. Everybody is going to have a slightly different style to how they do this very first page. Okay, let's take a look at the next page here. So again, we have this blank page on the left-hand side. You're going to notice that there is a particular reason for that. Why? Because we want to make sure on that very next page that the music starts on that right-hand side. We want all those odd numbered pages to be on the right-hand side. So let's take a look at what Patrick has done over here. So right here, you can see that he's got all the pertinent information. It's not exactly divided the way a major publisher would do it, but he's doing it in his own particular way, which is great. He's a self-published composer. Guess what? He can do whatever he wants. So at the very top here, he writes commissioned by the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. He writes the premiere dates. He writes also the dedication. So if you want to write a dedication, this is where that would go as well. The duration, approximately 25 minutes. Right below that, we have the instrumentation, 3 flutes, the third doubling the piccolo, 3 oboes, 3 clarinets in B flat and A. So he's got both of them playing, I guess, both kinds of clarinet. And then he's got the third player also doubling on the bass clarinet, etc. So it follows the same score order that we've seen with the other couple of pieces. Now down on the bottom, we have the percussion list. So this is very similar to what John Adams did. He put the percussion list right after the indication of all the different instruments in the orchestra. At the bottom there, because he's self-published, he's going to say published by Patrick O'Malley, ASCAP, that's his performing rights organization that he's affiliated with. And below that, he has his website, musicbypatricko'malley.com. Now on the very next page, because this particular piece has several movements, he's going to make sure that he writes those down along with the page numbers. So it's kind of like a table of contents, and he does indeed write contents right here. So 1 fantasia, 2 scherzo, 3 adagio, etc. Right below that, he puts our first program note. We haven't seen a program note yet. This is where you would put the program notes. So we make sure to put that over here. Now, I don't think that there are many extended techniques in this particular piece from what I recall. So we didn't put anything like that in the prefatory materials themselves. Now you'll notice here that another place that you can put the score in C or transpose score indication is at the very top left of your first page of music. So that's what Patrick does right here, concert pitch score. So it's very clear, okay, hey, this score is in C. There's no transpose shenanigans going on in this particular piece. All right, moving on to wind ensemble music. I'm going to show you one by a self-published composer. This is going to be John Mackey's recent Haunted Objects, which he wrote for the Siena Wind Orchestra in Tokyo, Japan. So you'll notice here with John Mackey, you'll see the composer's name at the very top, as we would expect. Then we have his title, Haunted Objects, and then he would write for a concert band. These are going to be the forces, the date, etc. He puts here the commission on the very bottom. So you'll notice some composers do it slightly differently. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as he's got all the information there, we know exactly who was the commissioner for this particular piece. And then on the very bottom, we have the copyright information, Osti Music, his publisher, which is just him, by the way, and his website, johnmackey.com. Very next page, we see that it's blank. Of course, we have this so that his first page of music, again, could be on the right-hand side of the score. The very next page is going to be the instrumentation page. That's going to be your most important page. Here you'll see it's in score order with piccolo, 2 flutes, oboe, bassoon, as we expect. Then we have our 3 B-flat clarinets, bass clarinet. You'll notice with wind ensemble music, this is going to have saxophones, typically speaking, and we're going to put them in the correct score order. In this case, we have alto, tenor, then baritone saxophones. If there was a soprano saxophone, you would put that, of course, above the alto saxophone. Right below that, you have your brass section, your trumpets, your horns, your trombones, your euphonium, and tuba. You'll notice a couple of differences here. You'll notice that the French horns are after the trumpets in a wind ensemble score. In an orchestral score, the horns are before the trumpets. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Another big difference is going to be the inclusion of the euphonium. In an orchestral score, you typically don't have euphonium. In wind ensemble scores, they're usually everywhere, and you put them right before the tuba. Then right after that, you have your ancillary instruments as well as your percussion. And of course, here, John Mackey writes it very similarly, actually, to Haas with the Ricordi score. So he actually lists right in the instrumentation page what each player is going to play without doing that asterisk thing that John Adams does in his version of the score. Then at the bottom here, there is an asterisk for the cymbal setup. He says for the actual notation of the cymbals, we're going to have triangle at the top, then hi-hat, the splash cymbal, and all the way on the bottom, we have the hi-hat, which is played by the foot. So he puts them in that order right there on the page. On the very next page, we have the program note. This is a very lengthy program note. So you can see some composers like to write program notes. They like to tell the audience or the orchestra or the wind ensemble in this case what the piece is about. Some composers prefer not to. It just depends on that particular composer. Now on the very next page, we're going to see our first page of music. This is going to be page 1 of the music. It's going to be on the right hand side, and it's going to be in the same exact score order that we saw in the instrumentation page. Now let's move on to the prefatory materials for chamber ensembles. Are these going to be any different from the orchestral and wind ensemble pieces that we've been looking at? Well, let's see. I want to start off with the composer Cassandra Miller, one of my favorite composers out of the UK, who was published by Faber Music. You'll notice that this is her piece called Perfect Offering for a chamber ensemble of 7 players. Of course, not an orchestra anymore. Again, this is going to be very similar to what we've seen before. We see the name of the composer right here, Cassandra Miller. Then we have the title, Perfect Offering for chamber ensemble of 7 players. And then we have the date of composition right here. You'll notice that the fonts, the way that it looks exactly, it's not going to be the same across even major publishers, let alone self-published composers. So I wouldn't worry too much about this as long as you have all the pertinent information and that it looks consistent alongside your entire score. That's the most important part of a professional representation. Okay. Looking down here, we see, of course, the publisher's name on the bottom, Faber Music. Moving on to the next page, we should expect to see some commissioning information. So, of course, we see here, Perfect Offering was commissioned for the Ives Ensemble. So that's right here. The first performance information, and we have the duration. So you'll notice the duration here is at the very top, and we also see this publishing information at the very top. So you'll notice that it's not really important where you put this information as long as it's clear and consistent across all of your scores. We have the duration, of course, 18 minutes. Then the instrumentation, flute, clarinet, and B-flat, piano, violin 1, violin 2, viola, and cello. You'll notice that the score order is going to follow the same score order as we see an orchestral score. It's just that a lot of instruments are missing, of course. The score here is transposed, so we'll expect to see that the clarinet part is in the written pitch, not the sounding pitch. All the other instruments here are in C. In other words, they're concert pitch. Then we have our additional information at the bottom here, our seating. So the following pairs should sit together. So she lists that pair 1 should be violin 1 and viola, pair 2, flute and violin 2, pair 3, clarinet and B-flat and cello. So it's really important for her that they're sitting properly next to each other in this exact configuration. If it wasn't that important to her, she wouldn't have listed this at all in this score. Now on this very next page, you'll notice that Miller does indeed write her own program note. I'm going to make a separate video about program notes down the line. I think it's very important just to know what typically goes in these things and whether you feel like writing one or not. You'll see that there was a wide gamut of possibilities between just the few scores that I showed you. Then on the very next page, you'll notice that it's blank, most likely so that the next page of music could be on the right hand side, which it should be. Now you'll notice, just like O'Malley's score, that Miller does write the transposition right at the top left of the page, just to remind players what the score is transposed at. Here, of course, it's a transposed score. So really that just means, hey, make sure that you're reading the clarinet line correctly, because you'll notice that in the clarinet line, we have it written in D major, while everybody is in C major. So that's a telltale sign that the whole thing is transposed. Now I can't have the video end without showing you an example of another self-published composer. This happens to be me, myself, and I. So I'm going to take a look at here my own score, which I just finished last year for the Amani Winds, called Ta'amulan, which means 2 meditations in Arabic. This is a piece that I scored for wind quintet. So you'll see right here on the very first page, it says score set number 1. So I like to have the score moniker at the very top left, and I like to say what set it is, because sometimes I do revisions, so I want to know which set of the score I'm looking at. So I have a lot of scores actually that say set number 2, set number 3, set number 4 at the very top. This particular one, I just made one set of it and it was pretty much good to go from the very beginning. You'll see my name, Saad Haddad, right at the very top, and the title. Then in a very small print, you see the instrumentation as well as the date. So this is not anything different than what you've seen before. On the very bottom, I have my publishing moniker. This is Press, my self-publishing company. And then we have the city and the website, sadandhaddad.com. So John Mackey does this as well. He puts the website on the bottom on the very first page because that's where all my music is housed. Then on the very next page, we have, as you expect, the instrumentation, and I put this in score order. So we have flute, oboe, clarinet in B flat, bassoon, and horn in F. Then right below that, you'll see right off the gate, I say, hey, this score is transposed. So be careful when you're looking at the score. Then the duration is 10 minutes. Then in the middle of the page, I go directly into the performance notes. So I do mention something about accidentals. I mention something about microtones. Then on the very bottom, we have the program note. Now, I myself like to write program notes. I actually sometimes even write these program notes before I even start writing the piece. That's just my personal way of doing things. Then on the bottom, I have my publishing moniker again and my website again, because I want to make sure, hey, if you want to look at my other work, hey, there is a website for that. Then as you expect, I have my first page of music, and it's going to be in the correct score order that I showed for my instrumentation page. And of course, because I wrote that the score is transposed, we should know that, hey, this score here shows all the written pitches for the instruments. So this would be really important, especially for the clarinet and the horn. The flute, oboe, and bassoon, of course, are written in concert pitch. So all in all, the main takeaway here is find a style that you like for your own scores. And once you find one, stick to it for a few years and see how it goes. I've definitely changed my style across the years, depending on something that I saw, something that I studied. But in the end of the day, as long as you pick something and stick with it for a while, it shouldn't take up too much of your brain space, okay? This is just something for you to have a professional first impression with, not something for you to go crazy with, right? The main thing, of course, is what is my piece about? How do I write my piece? How do I get better at composing? All those kind of things. The prefatory materials, yes, they're important, but they're not the most important thing. So don't obsess over it. Find some scores that you like, try to emulate them, and go from there. See you next time.